Michigan's motto for me has always been, Winter Water Wonderland. But today there's a different motto. My brother invited my dad and I up to his cabin in the Sable River Basin for Memorial Day weekend. This is the Sable further on down towards Lake Huron. This is what it's like where we went. We were thinking of driving up from the Detroit Metro Saturday morning to be on the river later that day. Instead, we left around 9:15 p.m. Friday night. Hopefully, the timing would allow us to avoid the Memorial Weekend traffic going north. Trying to fill up the car with the best gas prices, we stopped at the Citgo gas station on the corner of Adams and Auburn Roads. Then it was northeast on Adams to the entry ramp for M59 West. Then north on I-75. Even leaving that late, there was plenty of traffic going north. We passed one vehicle after another, pulling trailers with ATVs and whatnot. Near Saginaw, we passed by a Love's truck stop with significantly lower gas prices than the Citgo. Off another Saginaw exit was a Flying J truck stop with the same low prices. Oh well, maybe on the way back. We passed Bay City, Pinconning, and Standish, and stopped at the rest area 433 south of West Branch. After changing drivers, we continued northwest and left the freeway at exit 222 for the town of St. Helens, home of the Charlton Heston Academy. My grandpa took us kids fishing on the eponymous Lake St. Helens in his small aluminum boat with motor. Or he took us on Higgins Lake, or on Houghton Lake. He took us on one or some of these lakes. I've looked at photos of boat launches in case they haven't changed much over the decades, but I just can't remember. Prudenville does sound familiar, and it's the type of town name that a kid would remember. On one vacation, he and my grandma took me to a Barbershop Quartet vaudeville act at a theater in town. I remember the audience roaring with laughter. One of the singers held out an outhouse pit toilet prop in his hand, right when the lyrics were a double-meaning joke with it. They'd nailed the contrast of their audience's primitive pit toilets to their flush toilets, back in the city. I've tried to remember what theater it was by looking at the surrounding towns. Was it St. Helen, Roscommon, Houghton Lake, or Prudenville? Again, I cannot say. I've looked at two historic theaters around Houghton Lake and Prudenville, and one historic theater that sadly is derelict. I like to think the derelict, formerly the Strand, in its glory days. Its old name sounds like the place for a barbershop quartet. It even had proscenium seating. It could be one of them, or none of them. Like a multitude of U.S. factories, it might not exist anymore. An important venue for essential American free speech rights there were more active theaters then, and in the years before. The free speech from the theaters and stages of blue-collar community organizations, and especially those of the union halls, expressed sentiments far different than those of today's media oligarchs. 1/4 to 1/3 of all American workers used to work in American factories, onshore, in America. Today, so much of everything is imported that "Made in America" is a legend of the past. America's arsenal of democracy was a phenomenon in World War II, supplying not only America's war effort, but a bulwark for the Allies. They were awed by the sheer volume of goods America shipped to them. Even my paternal grandmother, the wife of an assistant prosecuting attorney in Detroit who went after the infamous Purple Gang, was a wartime factory worker. Many of these factory workers were union members. Many were also active in blue-collar social organizations. All those halls and stages provided a free speech platform of massive bandwidth that the ultra-rich of the time could not censor. There was also a cornucopia of independent free presses throughout America's small communities, towns, counties, and cities. Later, there were local radio and TV channels. This was the culmination of the American system of political economy, a system handed down from Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Matthew and Henry Carey, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, Abraham Lincoln, etc., etc. America became a great power instead of an oppressed European colony. But after World War II, in order to funnel America's national wealth to NATO's nations in the Cold War, U.S. elected representatives stood back and allowed foreign powers to destroy the livelihoods of American citizens working in U.S. factories. Factory after factory, industry after industry that America invented was offshored to foreign powers and no longer viable here. What do you do when your nation starts dying because you've thrown away your manufacturing base to foreign powers in your grab for world rule? You apply economic quackery. Instead of removing the importing and offshoring tumor, you deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. You start striking down FDR's banking laws that fixed the Great Depression and the crash of '29. Thus ends the era of boring banking and begins the era of control frauds and bank failures. Followed by more banking deregulation and more failures. The savings and loan crisis lasted 15 years, from 1980 to 1995. Even more deregulation, followed by Black Monday, the Lincoln savings and loan failure, the Keating Five. Despite the S&L crisis showing how inadequate state law was at protecting American citizens, in 1999, Republicans and Democrats killed off Glass-Steagall, FDR's law to keep Wall Street bankers honest. The Clinton and Bush administrations didn't enforce the laws still on the books. Criminal banking scams exploded out of control until they brought down the entire nation in 2008, destroying families, retirements, and homes. Instead of Americans finally getting justice, the president protected the criminals from prosecution and allowed them to keep their criminal gains. America is not a capitalist country anymore. Capitalism was FDR, honest Wall Street bankers, and blue-collar factory workers who powered the most productive, highest-tech factories in the world. Now, because law and justice are not enforced, more and more criminal donors rule America's elected officials in a kleptocracy. Because America's science and technology base is an emergent property of its factories, its science and technology base offshored with the manufacturing base. The military tech edge is gone. America fights with a military tech deficit. Furthermore, the Pentagon has warned, multiple times in multiple ways, that it can't do the job in a pure power war. There just aren't enough factories anymore. A blunder of catastrophic proportions for NATO's imperial ambitions. Laws protecting the free press and free speech reached their zenith in the 1970s. But in the 1980s, U.S. elected representatives began tearing them all down. Thus, media consolidation killed off the many independent presses, radio, and TV stations. Today's handful of media autocrats had the oligopoly that devoured them. Cable was wound up by consolidation. The internet promised free speech and a free press that could not be censored. But foreign and domestic autocrats, systemic bribery of elected and appointed officials, and megacorp consolidation killed net neutrality and conquered the unconquerable. Now, the memes of manufactured consent rule over privatized social media, policed by AI and algorithms. We've come a long way with today's surveilled and shackled streams, our robot police gagging speech in our privatized pens. Seeing that virtual reality has fallen short of its billing, maybe it's time to renovate those derelict real-world meeting places and practice America and free speech face-to-face. Turning north and heading out of town on F97, we passed Keno, then the Kirtland Community College, which used to train police officers. It has since moved, closed its old campus, and sold it to a treatment center for the young addicted to substance abuse. A sad allegory for our times. To the right, opposite the old campus, through 3 miles of road overgrown with branches used to lead to a drive with a cluster of cabins. My grandpa time-shared the one at the end called the Heavens to Betsy Club. It was a small one-room structure without power or water. An outhouse stood nearby, and the well hand pump was a walk back down the road. It had old bunk beds and a wood-burning heater. Us kids were up there on more than one occasion. No lights on a country road, it was dark. I watched for deer or even bear because a deer can wreck a car and they're common up there. A turn onto 18 and then past 72 we arrived at my brother's cabin past midnight. That group of cabins have toilets, running water, power, refrigerator, HVAC, and DSL broadband, such as it is. And although my brother traces his fly fishing pedigree to a time after he graduated, I like to think that my brother's fly fishing habit was forged by my factory machinist grandpa and the ramshackle Heavens to Betsy Club. Saturday morning was a couple bowls of oatmeal and standing around while my brother got his inflatable boat ready. Then it was off to Gates Lodge on the Sable River for lunch. It's a restaurant lodge, fly fishing store, and education center. If I remember, all of us had the bird Reuben, a Reuben sandwich made with turkey instead. We then drove to Connor's Flat Landing on the Sable River, and my brother put his inflatable boat in the water. My dad and I waited while my brother parked the car and trailer at McMaster's Bridge Landing where we would leave the river. His wife brought him back to Connor's Flat Landing, and then went back to the cabin to work on the computer over the DSL modem, a far cry from the Heavens to Betsy Club and kerosene wick lanterns. While we waited, a group of kayaks came downstream and put ashore for break and bathroom. The Connor's Flat Landing bathroom was a big dirty outhouse pit toilet with a concrete floor. Boaters are glad to have it. It's better than nothing at all, but it drives home the value of a public flush toilet, especially if the nation is able to keep it working and clean, like we used to. We left while the kayaking group was still ashore. My brother noticed pollen on the water's surface. Once, I wore an N95 mask on the golf course in the midst of COVID-19. I didn't get my traditional post-golf allergy attack. It also covered a lot of my face, preventing sunburn, so there's less need for my zinc oxide golfing war paint. On the river, I wore a mask and sunglasses under my Tilly hat. Sorry, you can't see me. I'm working the camera. Take enough water and drink it. Do not get dehydrated on the river. My brother tried to explain to us where the fish were likely to be and where they might not be. Bubbles flowing along the surface of the water show where the fish might be. Because the oars stick out quite a bit from the inflatable boat, things got awkward when the kayaking group caught up with us. To stay away from obstructions and keep to the middle of the river, my brother had to row the oars. They didn't realize how much leeway we needed. You can see the last of their fleet going around the bend ahead of us. We'd been drifting down the river for a while before I thought to screen capture our GPS map position. You can see how large some of the cabins along the river are. I don't think any of these are timeshares by blue-collar factory workers like my grandpa, or, even less likely, today's replacements, poor low-tech service sector workers. If I remember, we passed the kayak fleet again at Rainbow Bend. My dad remarked that one of the cabins looked as big as our house. This was near the Rainbow Bend State Forest campground. My brother said that it was too close to the campground. He proceeded to paint a picture of nosy, prying campers worthy of John Candy's comedy movie, Summer Rental. Small boat docks dot the riverbanks in front of the cabins. Some of the old docks are more substantial than they allow today. There are docks that are pretty extensive. Supports sunk into concrete-filled barrels, or concrete forms that were molded by barrels. Today, they're restricted to wood. We left the river in the late afternoon at McMaster's Bridge. The next public access would have been 2.5 hours further downriver at the Parmalee Bridge State Forest Campground and Canoe Camp. Back at the cabin, my brother made some brave attempts to cut his lawn with an unpowered push mower. He finally gave up and used an old gasoline-powered mower to cut his crabgrass and weeds yard down to a height that serves as a lawn. After a dinner that included baked beans and salad, they watched a DVD about fishing. The next day, we drove to Forest Dunes, an out-of-the-way golf destination of high reputation. Tom Weiskopf designed the original course. Golf Digest ranked it the best public course of 2003. There's also another 18 holes here, but they count as 36. The famous Tom Doakes designed the Loop. Inspired by the St. Andrews Old Course, which is played in both directions, the Loop is also played in both directions. Each direction is a separate 18-hole course, one named Black and the other Red. Both are highly ranked. Playing any of those would be a humbling experience for me, a lifetime hacker. But we went there to play a 10-hole par 3 called the Bootlegger. It's a fun design by Keith Rebb and Riley Johns. The Forest Dunes owner chose them because of their prior quick redesign of Winter Park 9. It so reinvigorated the historic but worn-out municipal course in Florida that it went from losing money to making money as a tourist attraction. At Forest Dunes, Rebb and Johns had similar time constraints, but were starting from scratch. The owner of Forest Dunes said that they finished the Bootlegger faster than they did Winter Park 9. The Bootlegger has driving range-type plastic grass mats for tee boxes. Speakers dotting the course play music. The all-fairway grass and hills tempt the golfer to whack it with their putter and see if they can roll it up onto the green. Some greens are funnel-shaped to bias them towards a hole-in-one. Other greens curve all over the place and drill the golfer on reading the gradients that their putt will have to traverse. The last hole crisscrosses the first one for unique logistics between the golf parties on the 1st and 10th tee. It was an approaching storm front that made it windy. The Bootlegger is for the family members of avid golfers, and a laid-back, whimsical experience for avid golfers too. Large groups are welcome, and the greenskeeper encouraged us to go barefoot if we wanted to. We finished the round and then played the Hilltop, a huge 18-hole putting green. It was a fun and different golf outing. Back to the cabin, my dad and I decided to go back that afternoon and try to miss the traditional Memorial Day Monday going home traffic jam, plus the rain. Our trip south was uneventful. At Saginaw, we hit the Flying J, or now the pilot truck stop. I'd been started on the Flying J, and later the Love's truck stops, when a friend helped me move all my apartment junk back from the LA Metro to the Midwest. They were busy places with bathrooms, shops, and restaurants. Memorial Day weekend brings to mind past vacations, and the past in general. The way of life that my grandpa enjoyed as a highly skilled blue-collar factory worker, who earned his pension and retirement, and my great-grandma, a real, live, Rosie the Riveter, and primary wage earner, whose factory career supported a disabled family member. That way of life is gone from America. Hopefully, if Americans take time to remember what was, on Memorial Day, we'll remember what we had and realize what we have lost, and thus be less susceptible to the brazen apologists who claim that the changes were inevitable, not a problem, and even for the better.